time today. So I'm going to be delivering an input on trauma and understanding the importance of attachment. Um, my name is Sue Gower. I'm the program manager for Adverse Childhood Experiences. Can I just check, Jamie, that you can see the screen? Is it moved?
Yeah, you're all good. Yeah, you're fine.
Okay. So I lead on safeguarding and child death for public health, and I'm formerly the learning and development lead for the Safeguarding Children's Board. I'm going to give a health warning as part of this right at the beginning. There's nothing overtly upsetting, but I'm conscious that there might be triggers in some of the content that we cover. So if you do need to just detach psychologically as we go through the presentation, then please feel free to do that. Difficult when I'm online and I can't see you to pick up on obviously cues. And we don't usually deliver this online for that reason, but I think it's important that we round up the sessions that have been delivered in person so that everybody gets an opportunity to understand the learning that's been shared throughout your sector. So I'll start off with adversity in childhood. I think a lot of you will be familiar with the term ACEs. This came about from a study in America where they were looking actually at the well-being of adults, and they looked at a cohort of about 17,000 people. And what they discovered very quickly was that there appeared to be a link between the adversities that they'd suffered in childhood and their well-being as an adult. And initially, the adversities they looked at, the ones that came up more frequently, were the ones you see on the left-hand side of the screen, those that are aligned with safeguarding and abuse. I don't think it would come as any surprise to anybody to see those. But over time, they realised that actually adversity runs wider than that. Being a young carer, having lost somebody through death or divorce, experiencing prejudice, or maybe being the victim of violence. So they thought actually the adversity is wider than we thought, and we need to widen our lens. The definition of ACEs, highly stressful events in which a child is directly harmed or lives in an adverse environment. So obviously it does cover a multitude. But the interesting thing about adversity, when you link it to adult well-being, and particularly in terms of substance misuse, as you can see on the screen, 2/3 of drug addicts report being abused as children. So actually what you're dealing with is a cohort of traumatized people who need help, rather than just trying to wean them off whatever substances they've used to cope with their situation. So we now are aware that the realms of ACEs are greater than those initially thought. And this model has been produced to give people an indication of what they should be considering when they're trying to understand the behaviours or the mindset of the people that they're dealing with. So you can see the household adversities there, which encompass bullying, domestic abuse, divorce, alcohol and substance misuse, death of a family member. We then move into the community aspects. So you're then looking at poverty, racism, you're looking at being collectively disempowered for whatever reason, violence or crime and gangs, what's going on in your immediate vicinity, your neighbourhood. And obviously we live in an age today where we have food banks. So the child poverty agenda is something that's of a national priority as well. But the new elements that have come into our awareness are really those to do with the environment and the cultural. So looking at the environment, natural disasters, war, very topical at the moment, disease. So we've all just come through COVID, but that's not the only disease that people we are serving are experiencing or may have experienced in their background. The cultural, we're looking then at topics like toxic masculinity, slavery, and intergenerational trauma, which is passed down generation to generation. And we've only got to look at what's happening with Israel and Gaza to understand what the Jewish people have experienced through their lifetime and what goes back generations. So all of these elements could be considered adversities. And the reason that it's significant is because the study found that young people with 4 or more adversities in their life, many of which had never been discussed or dealt with, run significant health risks. And as you can see on the screen, you're talking about being at risk of 11 times using intravenous drugs, 14 times more likely to have attempted suicide. as well as physical issues like in double the amount of liver disease. And as you can see at the bottom of the slide, more regular involvement with our healthcare services. So the study concluded that actually this is a huge unaddressed public health threat that we need to take more seriously, because a lot of the public health initiatives are dealing with what could be considered coping mechanisms to adversity and trauma. So I'm talking about smoking, self-harm, suicide, eating disorders, substance misuse. All of those, we're spending an awful lot of money trying to get people to change their behaviours. But how effective is that going to be if we don't understand and address the underlying causes? Because there's a reason people choose to engage in these lifestyles. So the study finally concluded that it acknowledged that childhood trauma was very common, but there was a direct link between childhood trauma and adult onset of chronic disease. As well as a circle of violence that goes with it. And obviously, the more types of adversity or trauma increases the risk of these problems. So not just an emotional problem, but a physical one as well. So I'm going to do a bit of scene setting. This is the only clip that isn't readily available on YouTube, and this was shared with me by Kent Police. So it is a very local study.
So where do the young people fit into all of this?
They're easy targets, fam. You get me? They're easy targets. They don't want to be on. They don't want to be working no job, fam. In debt from uni and then fuckery. Man, just encourage them. There's easy P to be made out here.
But what's the easy target? You understand? Are you talking about any child?
Fam, no. You got to look at the ends. You got to look at what youths are growing up in single parent households. You got to look at what man's environment is. You get me? What man's parents are doing. Is man's parents a crackhead? Is man's parents on food? You get me? They're the easiest targets there because they're tainted. You get me? They got no other option. You get me?
Yeah.
So they're the easiest ones to target.
I'm hearing what you're saying. So you're saying
you're making
vulnerable.
Nah, you're making it like the way you're making it sound.
Yeah.
It's like it's a hard thing, fam. This ain't hard, you know. Any one of these youths passing, man, could approach them, fam.
Yeah, but what if they were... Right, so you're saying that you could approach any youth. What, school age?
School age specifically, my G. Specifically. Like them early teenagers is the best age to catch them, fam. Listen, yeah. These youths ain't got dads, fam. They look up to me, fam. If you want to put it like that, I'm a role model to these youths, fam. You get me? Who else are they going home to, fam? What other male figures have they got to help them, fam? You tell me, innit?
So if we're looking to change anything on the streets, if we're looking to change anything for these young people, you're saying that this is the way it is, this is how it goes.
I'm not saying that, fam. I'm saying to you that these youths are easy targets and they can get easy P if they want to live that life, fam. Man ain't gonna force no youth to do what he don't want to do, innit? But man's never ever had a youth tell me no when I introduce him this life. Never had a youth say no to me, fam, because he wants that P. You get me? When he sees on the first day he's making a grand, fam. What? Like you think I'm the only one who does this, fam? You think it's just me? You're mad. I thought you knew better, fam.
So a bit sobering, but the relevance of that clip is that the children with adversities who go unaddressed are targeted specifically by the gangs. We know County Lines extends across Kent quite significantly. So you saw the adversities being mentioned, you know, single parents, poverty, what they were. If you didn't quite get the gang speak, which was being mentioned, it was all about money. That actually it's the early teenagers, it's the money that's attracts. And actually this is a strategic approach for those children who are particularly disadvantaged, who don't have support networks, who would come into the category of having ACEs. So that makes it even more important to understand what we're seeing, the behaviours, and it's why inclusion in terms of behaviour is probably more important today than ever before, because exclusion just puts them out on the street again without any support networks. And I know that's probably a bit of a contentious topic, but in terms of trauma and adversity, you know, that's the reality. So what is trauma? Definition from Gabor Mate: it isn't what happens to you, it's what happens inside of you as a result of what happens to you. And or it's a experience we all have that overwhelms our capacity to cope. So we physically are not in our normal state. We are overwhelmed by stress. And the issue with trauma is that we can all carry burdens, cope with them to a certain extent. But what we're finding, particularly with those who sadly complete suicide, is that often it's just a minor thing that will tip that person to the point of being overwhelmed or not wanting to be here anymore. So it could be something very simple. It doesn't have to be a major event, because the amount of trauma that somebody's coping with can just tip into that, overwhelmed state very, very simply. And this is being endorsed, underpinned by the results of domestic homicide reviews, safeguarding adult reviews, and also the safeguarding practices reviews for children and young people. So what is a trauma-informed approach? It's actually taking the learning that we had from America and the adversity in childhood to looking at a transformation model that enhances the awareness, enables us to recognise the signs and symptoms, that we put actually this learning in the way we're delivering services. We put it in our policies and procedures, and we look at how we can actively resist re-traumatisation. So it will be a unique place for each school in what they're doing. But what we know in children's services, people don't like to tell their story more than once. And the reason is because every time they tell it, they're living it again. So there's an element of trauma coming into it. So it is a strength-based model. We're not doing unto people, we're supporting them to heal from whatever trauma they have experienced, because trauma is in the past, it's happened. And the important thing for us is to create safety for whoever we're working with and to be there for them, to guide them through it. So this is just a diagram that explains how trauma takes hold and what it does to the brain, because it triggers a physical response and it shuts down the higher elements of the brain. So logical thought is the last thing that developed in our brain. Before that came emotions and memory. But the very first thing that our brain developed was survival and reproduction. And it's that part of the brain that we default to when we're stressed. When we're stressed, we don't relate to people. We don't remember things clearly. And we certainly don't think logically, because the brain is shutting down to keep you in survival mode. So if you have a child who is carrying a knife, and they are carrying that knife because they believe that they are unsafe and their life is threatened by it, their brain is going to be right down in the fundamental survival mode. You will not be able to get through to them by explaining that they might hurt somebody else, because they won't be in the middle state to relate. You certainly won't get through to them by saying, actually, if you're caught, you'll go to prison, because they won't be thinking logically either. So to get any kind of dialogue, they need to feel safe, comfortable, have a relationship where actually their brain starts working in the way that it should and coming out of survival mode. So that really explains why it's so difficult to get through to some of these young people whose lives are entirely about danger and their feeling of being unsafe and needing to survive in whatever manner they can. I mentioned earlier about the physical impacts of trauma and stress, and these are some of the things that can manifest as a result of it. And you can see quite a few things that are no surprises to anybody. Stomach aches, headaches, flashbacks, backache, we all suffer from this from time to time, but it can be an indication that there's a trauma response going on. And I heard the other day that in terms of how you respond, how you support young people, you might not know anything about in terms of what's happening at home, that a technique has been introduced by one school. They've contacted parents and said, if something happens the night before your child is coming in and you know that they're either disturbed, distressed, or you're unsure of how it's affected them, just send us a note or a text saying, handle with care. You don't have to tell us anything else, but we'll take that on board and we'll support them as best we can, which I thought that is being trauma informed. So that's an indication of how a simple thing can support what's going on. So going back to trauma, we're familiar generally with fight or flight responses, but actually there are more than that. There's 5 in total. You can see 4 here, the other one is friend. But in terms of fight or flight, it doesn't have to be, flight isn't about running away physically necessarily. It can be disengaging. It can be being a perfectionist, because actually what you're doing is you're unnaturally focusing on one thing. You could be working all the time, not wanting to take a break because you're distracting your brain. The same with freezing, can be depressive, dissociating, not being able to make a decision, don't want to try anything new, could be a perception that you're not trying at all. Whereas friend or fawn, people pleasing, not ever pushing back on anything, doesn't argue. All of these elements could be trauma responses, but often we look at them as just behaviour and we don't look at them in this way. So this is bringing to fore the consequences, the results of the adverse childhood experience study, linking it to stress and your body's natural trauma response, over which you've got no control at all. So some stress is good for us. We know that. Healthy stress, the kind of stress we have every day. If we're running late for something, you can feel your adrenaline going up, but it's usually over quickly and you know it's going to end. Tolerable stress is where you're in a situation, moving house, studying for an exam, pregnancy, something like that, or even divorce. You know that the stress is going to be there, but you also know there's going to be an end date. But it's when that stress becomes overwhelming that the trauma response, it becomes toxic and your mind starts shutting down because you are becoming overwhelmed. And the issue about this in relation to our workforce is that we can't support anybody else if we're in that state ourselves. You won't be able to regulate yourself, and you certainly won't be able to co-regulate somebody else. And self-regulation is becoming quite a key element in terms of how people are perceiving what goes on in schools. It's not just about education, because if you can't get the children's behaviour in a calm state, obviously they're not going to learn. So this clip is about self-regulation skills.
Successful people have strong self-regulation skills. They use them every day. The skills help them consciously direct, sustain, and shift their attention when necessary. They help them monitor and manage their thoughts, behavior, and emotions in this complicated world of ours. 3 of the self-regulation skills, known as executive function skills, are cognitive. These are used to monitor and manage attention, thoughts, and behavior. A 4th self-regulation skill is the ability to monitor and manage emotions. These skills are not inborn, but they are teachable. And we depend on them every day, especially when the going gets rough. Just like adults, when students are upset or angry, it's hard for them to use their executive function skills because their strong emotions take over. This can also make it difficult for them to listen, remember rules, and stay focused on learning. So, learning to monitor and manage emotions allows students to recognize their strong feelings and use strategies to calm down. Then they can use their executive function skills again. And research shows students with strong self-regulation skills have higher academic achievement and are less likely to act in impulsive or aggressive ways, or to withdraw when overwhelmed. They're also more likely to get along well with others and have strong social skills. Students with poor self-regulation skills can have emotional and behavioral problems and academic trouble, and are more likely to be expelled from school, starting as early as preschool. When students learn and practice self-regulation skills, they can build academic achievement, social competence, and positive growth throughout their lives.
So nothing that you won't be aware of, but it's just an example of how this is really coming into mainstream thinking. In terms of coping mechanisms to stress, as I mentioned earlier on, it's relating to the public health priorities, but it tends to be cyclical, and a lot of shame comes with it. So you go through some kind of trauma, suffering, that leads into a coping behaviour that's negative in the scheme of things. And Gabor Mate's view is that if people become addicted to self-soothing behaviours, it's because they didn't receive that comfort when they needed it at the time they needed it. So they found something that does the job. It might not be in their long-term well-being, but the body isn't interested in that. The brain isn't interested in that. The brain will just go for something in the moment, and that's what it does. But often, as I say, it becomes cyclical because there is an element of shame in somebody, maybe overdoing the alcohol, behaving in a different way, and then it just continues. So it's important to understand what the indicators can be, but also that they're doing it at the time because that's what they needed to get through. I heard Tracy Emin last night talking about her bed, the messy bed, and somebody said, what would it look like today? And she said, oh, it would probably be pristine and I'd have my cats there. And she said, I feel embarrassed looking at it now. But then she said, I realised that it was my safe place. It got me through a really difficult time. And I think that probably underpins the logic in this model. So we are still dealing with post-pandemic consequences. And I think this slide really sets it out really well, that actually the children who were doing well in COVID became vulnerable, and those who were vulnerable became unwell. We know that the mental health needs of our child and young persons has increased. The waiting lists are very extensive in some cases. So the need for preventative approaches is even greater than it ever has been. And that's really why the trauma-informed approach is so beneficial and links actually very nicely to social prescribing. The motto being normalise, don't medicalise. It's not all about medicine or treatment. It can be about social stimulation. But before ever we can get to that space where we want to understand what's happened to young people and how they're feeling, we've got to listen to what they say, and they've got to be ready to share, because as you know, they're not going to share with just anybody. So this therapeutic hierarchy of needs is generally accepted as what we need to consider before we get into the space of trying to explore the problems that or adversities that people have gone through. Safety is at the heart of the trauma-informed agenda. Developing good relationships, being able to co-regulate and offer empathy, then exploring what resilience an individual has, and then ultimately exploring the trauma. So these are the trauma-informed principles. They all work quite nicely with each other, and this maps across to generally how we provide our services, and it's a good test really to consider them, to understand them and see if we're incorporating these in what we do. The government has just produced these principles on the HM.gov page with some narrative behind it, because this is already in policy in Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales. England is just coming to the table on that one. So this just is a little clip on co-regulation and what it actually means. It's very short, but I think quite effective. So just a little simple clip, but it takes us back to co-regulation and the importance of it, you know, when one nervous system calms another. So going back to the earliest stage, when we're born, a baby gets upset, the caregiver will pick them up, try and calm them down, because they're in a calm state to do that. And you use not only touch, but tone, movement to do that. And generally, if that's modeled to us when we're younger, then it's something that we will learn and adapt to as we get older. But obviously, if you've never experienced that, as you get older, it becomes more difficult to calm yourself down because that skill's never been learnt. But the positive is that it can be learnt by good modelling and good engagement. This really is something that is apparent from the earliest time. And this still face experiment is quite interesting in terms of seeing how quickly a baby reacts when they don't get attention.
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby who's about a year of age.
I'm my good girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yes.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this, and then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, come on, why aren't we doing this? Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it, they actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay. I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, what a big girl.
It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that normal stuff that goes on, that we all do with our kids. The bad is when something bad happens, but the infant can overcome it. After all, when you stop the still face, the mother and the baby start to play again. The ugly is when you don't give the child any chance to get back to the good. There's no reparation, and they're stuck in that really ugly situation.
So a reality check there, and you saw how quickly the young baby picked up on the changes. And we have a cohort of children who have got disrupted attachment. They may have never had that engagement, that support, and their behaviours have developed accordingly. It is the fact that our body will prioritise attachment over physical safety, which may come as a surprise, but actually explains why gang members stay with gangs so long, even though they know it's a dangerous place to be because of turf wars, etc., etc. But that need for attachment that they may not be getting anywhere else is so strong, and it's fundamental. Let's come out of this one. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs, most of us are familiar with it for adults. This is a child's version of it, but you can see that at the bottom, the psychological need, the safety needs, has really just been exemplified by the attachment clip. And there is a view expounded by Karen Treisman, who is a leading expert in trauma-informed practice, particularly for children, that we need to reflect on what we're seeing. For a long time, we've considered attention needing children, but actually, are they attention seeking or they're attention needing? It's a strength based view now, not a negative. So our language is actually changing to look at, if they are attention seeking, what's behind it? Why do they need attention? Because clearly they're acting in a way that indicates there's an unmet need. And this was an interesting one, that actually most trauma we see in offices or in the workplace is interpersonal trauma. and it starts to manifest and reflect the status of our attachment relationships. This was defined by Bessel van der Kolk. He is the author of a book called The Body Keeps the Score, about how stress impacts on our physical state. So trauma-informed language, we are shifting from asking what's wrong with people. I mean, I remember as a child being asked, what's wrong with you? You know, it's actually what's happened to you now. And that's a positive, inquiring, caring term of phrase. The more you look at language in children's services, the more you realise just how negative it can be. I'm sure some of you are familiar with the Troubled Families Agenda that was imposed some years ago. And you question now why we thought it was appropriate to label families as being troubled. That might be the case, but was it really a good label to, attach to them? So language does matter, and it is changing. So did not attend, a term that was used in GP surgeries when children didn't turn up for an appointment. That was a negative. 2 missed appointments could often lead to them being struck off a list. Now there's a recognition that actually children can't take themselves to GP appointments. So if they're not brought, then is there some kind of neglect or safeguarding issue? So the terminology is now changed to was not brought. There was a label, hard to reach families. That is now considered not appropriate, and we're using the word underserved, because the reality is that cohort are not receiving the services for whatever reason. But hard to reach implies it's something to do with them. Children in care, now care experienced children, and I've already mentioned attention seeking versus attention needing. So there are some links there that you'll get from the presentation afterwards, from the Council for Internet Safety in respect of domestic abuse and also child exploitation. It is important, and this is the voice of the child in terms of victim blaming language.
These are real statements that professionals have used to describe victims of child sexual exploitation.
The language you use matters.
It affects how people see us.
It makes us feel like what's been done to us is our fault.
And it makes us feel less of a person.
Professionals need to recognise our vulnerability.
We want you to see us as children and as victims.
The only person that should be blamed is the perpetrator.
We depend on you professionals to keep us safe.
Negative language reinforces negative attitudes to victims of exploitation.
And negative attitudes lead to systematic failures to protect us.
Helping us starts with the language you use, so choose it carefully.
Thank you.
So it is something that's come up the ladder of importance in terms of all things trauma. And just to give you an example of how this translates, this slide produced by a certain institute, 10 things to say instead of stop crying. And it's about validation, it's about reflection, it's about confirming that you're there in a safe space, instead of giving instruction to stop whatever you're doing. So there is more examples like this out there, but I just thought I'd share this one because it's quite pertinent, I think. So some trauma terms that I'm going to share with you. The language that we're using in respect of trauma is changing as well. So you've just got some examples here. Intergenerational trauma. So that's when, as I mentioned earlier, you've got adversity in childhood being passed down the generations. When I grew up in the 60s, 70s, it was okay to smack children. And that was because generation before had smacked children. Happily, that's an example of intergenerational experience that's been interrupted, because now it's not considered okay. So it can change. Vicarious trauma, it's when you empathise with trauma survivors. and you yourself start changing your behaviour because you've been affected by their experiences. So you're taking on board their emotions, their behaviours. We see this sometimes in with domestic abuse situations where the worker is so close to the victims that in their own lives they react to whatever they see as if they were the victim themselves. So they've taken on that role. Secondary trauma is slightly different. It's when you hear or see something about a traumatic experience. It could be a clip on the television. It could be you're reading a report about something. And I would highlight the need for support to staff who particularly work in administrative roles that are exposed to that kind of information. Often we think it's the frontline workers. They're the priority in terms of support, and of course they are. But we must remember as well the effect that this information can have on people who aren't regularly exposed to it. And, you know, I manage the child death process. I have a business support officer who compiles reports of the deaths of all the children in Kent. We have 120 a year. It's not an easy task. And we're very mindful of the need to support her. I would imagine it's the same in GP surgeries as well. And your safeguarding roles, your SENCO roles, you're going to be exposed to information that might be difficult to read, to hear, and certainly for other people in lesser roles to process regularly. And compassion fatigue, where actually you are physically and mentally exhausted. And we're seeing this in our frontline staff who've worked through COVID and beyond, and it's just getting too much. They're just zoning out and they're not coping well. Reachable moments come into this arena. I think in your profession, you'll be familiar with the teachable moment when you have a breakthrough with a child in what you're trying to teach them. The reachable moment in the social space is circumstances where a child is more likely to take up officer support. It could be a gang member who's isolated from the gang because they've got into trouble, and suddenly, without the armour and the bravado of their comrades, they suddenly default to being the child in need of support, and they're receptive to that support. This has come out from a number of safeguarding reviews which have identified this as being the case, missed opportunities often to engage with that young person. So in Kent, we've developed a model called Help, Hold and Heal. We're moving from adversity in childhood to being trauma informed, to understand the importance of trauma, to now being healing centered in what we do, because actually what we want to do is heal from that trauma and move on to independence and resilience. So this is quite an easy model to map across whatever work you're doing. In helping, are you asking what's happening? Are you building trust and co-regulating with the person you're working with? Are you present? Do they feel safe? Are they having appropriate support? Are you available as much as is possible to them? Do they feel supportive? And then healing, is your ambition to help them develop resilience, to look for improvement and enhanced independence? Because sometimes in the system, we look at a presenting need and we decide that maybe this need needs 6 sessions and that's it, because we can't give any more. That isn't trauma informed, and it's certainly not healing centered. So we need to push back on our systems and look to see how we can adapt them to get better outcomes. So what does recovery look like? Well, Gabor Mate, he expounds that we'll know healing is happening when life starts looking less like one trauma response after another, because we know families in which there's a lot of adversity, there's a lot of chaos as well, and drama. And again, the statement about trauma disconnecting from our authentic selves and healing reconnecting us to it. So we've developed in Kent this healing centred wellbeing tool for use by staff and individuals. We were very conscious that staff supervision generally tends to focus on the business need of the organisation. It might touch on how people are feeling, but feedback is that it's varied and it's not regular, inconsistent. So we co-produced this, and it's available on our website, traumainformedkent.net. You can find it easily, and it's printable off as an A5 booklet. whenever we deliver this session in person, we have handouts. So this essentially is guidance note for peer supervision, and it starts off with the dimensions of wellness, because self-care is really at the heart of what we can do to support ourselves and our well-being and to keep our stress levels down. You know, we've touched on the physiological effects of stress at the beginning, and really management of stress is what will help us through. So you've got the 8 dimensions there. And then we go into a definition of stress, what it is, and what healing centered is, and something about acknowledging the workplace and what we want out of this, and where healing features. The tool itself builds on trauma-informed practice and what the principles are. And it looks a bit like this. Slightly, it looks like the PowerPoint has moved a few bits of the text, but nevertheless, I think you can see in the middle the spheres and these states that we move through in our lives that are quite normal. So at any one time, we can feel we're adapting to stress. We can feel that the stress response is actually making us feel like we're struggling. And obviously, when you're unregulated, you feel that you can't cope, you're overwhelmed, and you're in crisis. So introducing this as a tool to say to people, so how are you feeling today at the beginning of this session, opens up that door that is often completely closed because nobody ever asks you how you're feeling about anything. If they do, it's an afterthought. So this brings it into meaningfulness and maps across to the Help, Hold, Heal model as well. So the aim being to help staff stay in or return to the thriving element of where they are their authentic selves, they've got healthy stress responses. We've given some definitions about what each of these elements might look like, and also what might be the support mechanisms that you can use if that's identified. Because not everybody is going to need the top end in crisis help all the time. We've put something in about workplace triggers and stress management and the coping strategies at the bottom. So again, we're going to the well-being elements of it. So what might help you to manage it yourself, either to complement external support or to replace it. It might be this is enough. So we're talking about bringing in the senses, we're talking about breathing, we're talking about exercise, we're talking about mental stimulation, whether it's a hobby or whatever, anything that links into the well-being wheel that we saw at the beginning. Something else about controlling what you get stressed about and adapting, accepting, avoiding or altering what you do is there as well. And then finally, a definition about what trauma therapy is and when it might be needed. And it is definitely for the top end of the spectrum. Not everybody who is feeling stressed or struggling would need this kind of support, although it is out there. And we are linked in with a number of providers who can support this. So just coming to the end of the presentation and introducing you, we've talked a lot about stress and trauma and being triggered. I started the meeting by saying if anybody was triggered to manage that as best they could. There is a term that's come into the trauma language, and it's glimmers. A glimmer being the opposite of a trigger. And it's a cue to your mind to think about something positive, because our minds are wired to remember what has the potential to hurt us or harm us, because that keeps us safe. We're alert. We don't want that to happen again. So a glimmer is a small moment where actually you can take yourself into a place of calmness, where you actually feel safe, where you feel happy. And it will be different for everybody. That's one of my glimmers. If I see the sea, it instantly brings a calming effect on me. But it's worth exploring glimmers. And the psychological position now in America is that if you hold a glimmer for 5 minutes, it becomes a glow. So that feeling of well-being, because you've just taken yourself into a happy place, essentially, no matter what that is. So what are we doing in Kent? We are delivering quite an extensive programme for the next 2 years. I've been inputting to the schools training that Jamie and the Thrive team have been delivering with this input for the last year and a half. But in our own right, we have an hours engagement presentation that can be adapted. This one is for schools. We have a lot of other ones that we can give to different organisations who might be interested in this. As I mentioned, we've got the Trauma Informed Kent website, and we're putting a lot of information on there now, developing it incrementally. We are shortly going to be delivering a Trauma Informed Champions course, which is aimed at extending the skills of professionals such as SENCOs, designated safeguarding leads, mental health leads, just to extend their knowledge and skill set. And we also are running a system leadership programme for people who want to effect change in this space. They want to understand what this is about, and we can give you the skills and the training to go back to your organisation and make it happen. This is on the regulators' agenda now, so Ofsted and CQC are actively looking for evidence of trauma-informed practice. We will be having a system leadership engagement event on the 31st of March at the Village Hotel in Maidstone. And also we have an annual conference on the 13th of October at which Dr. Karen Treisman will be speaking, and she is a remarkable lady with a wealth of knowledge, and she does an awful lot of work with schools and in children's services. So all these are free, they're offered at no cost, so I'd encourage you to take up the opportunities, and I'll make sure that the information gets shared with you through Jamie's team. This is an example. This isn't current now because it talks about, I think this was about 2020 this came out, but as you can see, Islington Council were praised because they had implemented trauma-informed training to 11 schools, and they'd seen the transformation to the culture in the schools that had been affected by this. So Ofsted highlighted this in their report. Just some links I mentioned about the national approach. So you've got Trauma Informed Toolkit produced by NHS Scotland. It's got a health flavour to it. There are 2 quality marks that you can achieve, one for employers and one for organisations. And I'm currently taking a school through the employers one. That will give them an accreditation that speaks loud and proud to say, actually, we take this seriously and we can use the quality mark in our work, in our publicity, you know, in attracting people to the school. So it's worth considering. And I've put the government definition there as well. If you would like to contact me after this meeting for any information or anything else, then please, my email's at the bottom of the slide. So we've come to the end a few minutes early, so to give you an opportunity to